Hello, everybody. My name is Russ Graf, and welcome to our session today regarding the topic of advancing your business on the inventory maturity curve. Again, my name is Russ Graf. I'm a Vice President of Channel Management at Netstock, and really appreciate the community, the Dynamics community, voting for this session and allowing me to make this presentation to you. So that was nice of you. This is my second time around, so apparently I didn't mess up the first time too badly, so I appreciate that support. Also, I want to make sure you probably already know the drill by this point in the conference, but please feel free to enter your questions and comments in the chat function as we go through this presentation. As you know, it's recorded, but then afterwards we'll be live to answer questions with you as well for about 10 minutes, but please feel free to make use of that tool. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Quick agenda for today, just to give you a feel for where we're headed with this. We're going to talk about the 5 steps of the inventory maturity journey and cover what we're looking at there. Then we'll segue into a little bit of discussion on the framework around best practices that really applies to this topic as well as others in your organization, I think. Then we'll talk about some sort of fundamental concepts around this that help inform the discussion regarding the maturity curve itself, and that'll be around the area of inventory risk, making sure we have a good grounding there. Then we'll really spend most of our time talking about the inventory management maturity curve itself, and talk about some different aspects of that and drill into that pretty deeply. And we'll actually take a little side trip into a deeper focus just on forecasting itself, which is just one component of inventory management and planning. And so we'll do that. And then we'll wrap it up with a little bit of a discussion and maybe some suggestions on how we might deal with change management throughout the course of this effort and journey. And you'll probably hear me use that term journey a number of times during the course of the presentation. And that because that's really what it is. And so I think there's a couple of key steps, right? As we begin the journey, we have the ability to think about different steps in that journey. And the first one is really to identify where you currently stand, right? As we talk about some of these things and define the characteristics of different stages of the journey, be thinking about where you are in your organization in terms of that stage and that step. So once you identify where you're at, then you know where you're headed, right? So the next step then is to know what that next step is. If I know where I'm at now, where do I need to get to next? And then important to that is the third step, which is how do I get there, right? What do I need to do to make that transition, to continue that journey into that next step where I want to get to? And then as part of that, we want to talk about how you would assess as objectively as you can your own internal environment in terms of people, processes, and technology. And we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide and go a little bit deeper into that. But I think that's an important part of this process for you. And then the fifth thing would be to understand the impact of the improvement, right? What's the impact of going down this journey, taking this, going down this path, and understanding what the impact of this is going to be on your organization and on your people for that matter. So if we think about that, there's a couple of different levels of that, right? We could think about, okay, if I do a better job of managing my inventory, the standard value proposition, if you will, is, well, I'm going to increase my sales because I'm going to increase my fill rate. I'm going to have more stock on hand. I'm going to take care of my customers, and that's great. Or secondly, I hopefully will be able to reduce my excess inventory and free up some cash, and so that's a benefit, right? So those are certainly impacts, but I think those are surface issues, right? I would encourage you to think a little bit deeper about that and think about, well, okay, so if I serve my customers better and fill more orders, yes, I'm going to increase sales and profits as a result of that transaction. However, what's more important, I think, and a deeper strategic value is that I'm going to make that customer more sticky. Right? They're going to appreciate, they're going to be more loyal, they're going to do more business with me. In fact, they may also refer their friends, which will increase my activity. It will make me more competitive in my landscape. So as you think about the competitive environment that you're in, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, there's a value proposition there. So it goes a little bit deeper than just that surface level. In terms of the excess inventory and freeing up some cash, certainly that's a great thing. But I would think, I believe we could think deeper about that in terms of, now what can I do with that cash or that extra working capital, right? Where can I apply that elsewhere in the business to have a bigger impact? For example, maybe I can do more research and development, produce some new products, maybe penetrate a brand new market, perhaps hire more people, or expand my warehouse, or open up a new geography somewhere else in the world or in the nation. So there's many things you can do with that increased cash flow and freed up money. So there's really a deeper level improvement there and impact there. So I really encourage you to think about that as we go through this process. And I think it's important to share that with the rest of the team, from executives on down, as to, hey, here's why we're going through this effort, right? This is really going to make a big difference in multiple ways in our organization. So I want to step back now to that fourth bullet regarding people, process, and technology. This is really kind of a framework that I like to use, that I would call a best practices model. And we want to think about these three different components of those best practices. And the first one is, of course, our people. It's a critical asset to our organization. People is what makes the difference. But we need to be objective about what our team looks like when we begin this journey. Do I have the folks on the team that I need to be able to be successful in this journey? Are they bought in? Do they have the tools they need, right? Have I given them the support and the education? If I don't have all the right people, or if I'm short-staffed, then how do I go about finding those folks and recruiting and building my team to be able to be successful in this effort? So there's an awful lot around the team and the culture of that team and the motivation and support of that team, giving them what they need to be successful. That's part of this environment. Then we have to think about what processes and procedures we have in place. Again, specifically to our topic of inventory management, you've got a strong ERP application already in place. So what is your ability to leverage that ERP application to its fullest? We know that in many implementations of ERPs over the years, and I've been in this business a long time, we see a lot of companies are barely scratching the surface of the native core functionality of those technologies that they have. So let's make sure we're leveraging that and we're trained up on everything that system can do, and that it's on current versions and taking advantage of current technology and capabilities. In addition to that, to make sure we have our procedures in place and that our teams are being held accountable to following those procedures, right? If we're not being held accountable, then what's the point of having these policies and procedures in place? So we need to do that, and we need to understand the importance of that, so that if we have the right folks doing the right things, then we're going to obviously have a much better chance of providing that best practice sort of approach to whatever function it is in the organization that we're trying to solve or improve. And then the third topic is, of course, a technology one, near and dear to my heart and to many on this call, is, let's understand what the technology and tools are that we have available to make sure that we're operating in this best practices environment. So let's dive in a little bit on that topic, if you will. So what we see in many organizations now, of course, we've got, again, current technology in place, certainly includes our core ERP application, all right? And so we've got some great reporting, some great native functionality in terms of inventory. We've got master files and fields of information that capture mins and maxes and reorder points and maybe EOQs and lead times from our vendors and so forth. And we've got some reporting that we can do that results from that, right? So many times we're just leveraging standard out-of-the-box ERP capability and reporting to help us resolve and work through this issue of inventory management. And that's kind of a starting point, sort of a baseline, if you will. Then secondly, what we see in kind of an enhancement to that, a step up from that, is leveraging custom reporting, whether you develop those yourself or with your business partner, generating some custom reports that maybe give you specific focus, maybe eliminate some extraneous fields of data that aren't important to you and allow you to highlight the ones that are, maybe sort and filter that data a little bit differently as a result. So that makes sense. Then oftentimes we see a next step up being the use of spreadsheets. So we're now extracting data, whether it's from the back-end database or whether it's from maybe the source of those custom reports that are maybe already pre-filtered. Now I'm putting data into a spreadsheet and being able to do some additional calculations there, some modeling, some what if, and just leveraging the power of Excel in most cases and what that tool has the ability to do for us. Then the next level up, if I were to continue on that progression, might be using true business intelligence or BI type applications, getting more dashboard orientation, right? Graphics and color coding, and more visual cues to help me understand kind of the health of my inventory and what's going on there, and highlighting certain things, maybe by exception, and doing some intelligent filtering there within my BI tool. And then probably the highest level in terms of technology deployment in this regard would be using a third-party application, a tool that's, purpose-built just for one thing. In the case of inventory, there's tools that are just their purpose in life is to do inventory demand planning and forecasting and so forth. And so that would be kind of the highest level use of technology. So one of the things that you can do in terms of your self-evaluation here, as we talk through this today, is, what technology are you currently using? So you've got the people, the processes, and then the tech to help you drive understanding of where you are in terms of inventory management. So now I'd like to think about a couple of specific fundamental concepts, I guess, if you will, to help us understand and help us inform our overall discussion of the maturity curve. So a real critical fundamental concept is this whole thing of inventory risk and what that is. And essentially, it's an availability risk, right? What is the risk of me having stock on hand when there's demand presented for it, either from a customer or from a production facility that's ready to go produce some product? Do I have all the raw materials and components necessary to do that? So on the supply side, there are two key risks, two primary ones. One is that my supplier could potentially deliver product late. So I'm expecting that on a certain date and it comes in a week later, 2 weeks, a month later. And certainly that's happening a lot these days in the world of COVID and some of the supply chain challenges that we're hearing about every day in the news. And I expect will continue to be a challenge for us for the foreseeable future, probably for at least a year out before things hopefully settle down. But then there's also another risk from the supply side, and that's the suppliers that deliver less than requested. I order 100 quantity of some item and I get 80 or 90. And if that happens frequently enough, that's a challenge that I have to address, and that's a risk now to my availability of being able to service my customers or my internal demand. On the demand side of the coin, however, there's another risk, and that is that our actual demand might be exceeding what our forecasted demand, what we expected to sell or expected to be required by our production facility. We now have actually higher demand than anticipated. And of course, that has the potential of then producing shortages and risk to my availability. So there's really two concepts here, or two feeders to this concept of inventory risk, and we need to make sure that we're understanding those and are managing with those, right? Then another conceptual topic, I think, that helps inform this whole topic is sort of a risk methodology and sort of how this all fits together. And so we've got a couple of strategies that come into play, right? And so the model really starts with understanding what your marketing strategy is and maybe your go-to-market concept. All right, your organization may position itself in the marketplace as one that can fill an order in 24 hours or ship same day or those kinds of things. The highest, the broadest offering of products in your market of any competitor, right? Those kinds of things, and we see those in advertisements and on websites and so forth all the time. So one of the strategies that impacts what our level of inventory investment is going to be or needs to be is how our go-to-market strategy informs that. But then kind of on a competing side of the fence is our financial strategy and the constraints that they typically employ, right? So we've got a financial strategy many times that wants to minimize the investment in inventory, right? We want to free up that cash, keep that number on our balance sheet as low as we can, provide maybe some constraints in terms of purchase rules, right? What the workflow needs to be to get a purchase order approved, if there's thresholds of dollar values that are acceptable before it has to go to a higher level approval and so forth. So all those things tend to be part of the financial strategy and, led by shareholders and boards of directors and C-level folks that say, here's what we want our inventory investment to look like from a financial strategic standpoint. And many times that's at cross purposes to what the sales and marketing side of the organization would like, right? If it was up to the sales and marketing team, we would always have inventory, never run out, and always be able to fill every requirement. And so, of course, there's cost to that. And so there's a a competing interest there. And then, of course, both of those strategies now are also impacted by what we just talked about in terms of inventory risk, right? And this is a key factor that we just discussed. And of course, there are a couple of key pieces to that, the demand risk and the supply risk that we just described as being drivers to this analysis and this discussion. And there are also some multipliers, if you will. So that lead time issue, especially again in a COVID and a constrained supply chain environment, that's a challenge. How often we order our product, right? What's our targeted inventory turns, and what does that look like in terms of our replenishment cycle, and how often we buy and how many days we cover with that purchase. So there's a number of different multipliers that feed that inventory risk that then informs the inventory investment in that world of constraints and competing interests and strategies from the different aspects of the organization. Okay, so with that risk understanding kind of as an underlier, let's now talk about a little bit more in depth this concept of the inventory management maturity curve, if you will. And I know this is a little bit of a busy slide. Hopefully the resolution is good enough for you to be able to see this. Maybe you've got it on a larger monitor, but I'll walk you through this in some detail as well, so that should help, and because we're going to spend a few minutes here. So first, notice what the two axes are here. We've got on the upper left going up is the maturity and benefit axis. And across the bottom is our effort axis, both in terms of cost and time. And so, of course, as we make our way to the upper right, as we follow that curve, we're going to see greater maturity in terms of our sophistication along this inventory management environment. But we're also going to see that there's increased effort, there's increased cost and time involved in achieving these different layers or levels of maturity. So, the first question again is, where do you see yourself on this map, on this journey? And so we'll talk through some of these things, and it's our estimation, my estimation, and in our firm where we really believe that the section here that's color-coded green is really pretty fundamental, that most middle market, medium, small size businesses that are typically in our market and that are would expect to be on this call and listening to this message would really find themselves in that space. And really, we would encourage you to think about these first layers, these green-coded levels of maturity as being pretty fundamental and pretty critical for you to be able to compete in your marketplace and in the environment that you're in. And of course, it really starts now down in the lower left, which is really related to data accuracy and data purification, is what those two cells refer to. And so if you think about that, regardless of how you're doing your inventory management, your purchasing decisions, any kind of reporting around inventory, it all entirely relies on the quality of that data, right? You've absolutely got to be able to rely on the numbers that you're seeing in your ERP, that they reflect accurately and on a timely basis, right? This needs to be very timely. And it really reflects your actual stocking levels and perhaps stocking locations, right? You may have multiple warehouses, whether those are virtual or real, but you really need to understand that you've got numbers there that make sense and that are accurate. Because even if you're using the most basic tools from that point on, if this piece isn't correct, then you're going to be in trouble, right? And we hear this a lot, customers that we talk to, that there's definitely challenges there. Even if your most important items are the ones that are most accurate, that would be a starting point, right? If we believe in the 80-20 rule, the Pareto rule, probably 20% of your profits are 80% of your profits are coming from 20% of your items. So let's identify those 20% and make sure that those are the tightest, right? That we have the best data there that we can, and the best timeliness of that data, which then lends itself really to the next step up this curve, which talks about the quality of the data and the nature of the items that you have and understanding the nature of those items. So one of the things we talk about there is whether you should even stock certain items, right? So let's make some decisions regarding stocking versus non-stocking and make sure that we're focusing our energy and our time and effort in those areas that are most important. So it's possible that you may have some items that we can, the term is rationalize those items, right? Pull some items out of inventory. Maybe you've got a vendor that can manage them. Maybe you've just decided that some you could drop ship, others that you really don't need to carry. They just are dead weight. They're not moving. They're trending down. So you have to make some hard decisions sometimes to say, you know what, we're not going to bother stocking these items. And that can clean up the database and free up some cash and so forth. But then the items that remain that you do need to stock and want to stock, you really need to understand the nature of those as well. And of course, we're familiar with ABC analysis, ranking those items in terms of value. And that's important. So again, typically an 80-20 rule applies, right? Let's identify the top 20% most valuable items and focus our energies there, make sure we've got accurate counts. But then there tends to be another aspect of those items. It's not just the value, but it's also how fast they move. Or perhaps if they are critically important to an important customer of yours. And sometimes you may even have requirements to stock certain items to keep a customer account. They require that you hold inventory of a certain type, certain items for them. So there's all kinds of things that may go into that decision in terms of which are your most important items, but you need to understand those, believe in those, assess those criteria on occasion, revisit those on occasion to make sure that they're still valid and that the items that we've identified as being most important, that are my contributors to margin, most important to my customers, that move the fastest, provide the best value, that those are the ones we're paying closest attention to. And so we've got to be able to do some analysis and some slicing and dicing of the data to be able to do that. And that's a foundation then moving to the next step, right? So next then on the list is really thinking about our forecasting environment. And the next slide is going to talk a little bit more into to that topic, a little bit deeper dive on forecasting. So I'll defer that conversation for the moment. But next we want to talk about then our safety stock calculation. And we've all heard the term just-in-time inventory, right? Which is mostly unattainable, especially again in today's COVID environment. And most of those businesses that were very lean and really very cutting a close edge in terms of that just-in-time really have been hampered and hindered and hurt by the supply chain challenges that we've got because they had no room for error. So think of safety stock not as just-in-time, but as just in case. Right? Again, we talked about those risk factors. And so if we understand what the risks are and we're evaluating those risks on a regular basis, then we should be able to identify with some certainty what our level of buffer stock or safety stock needs to be. Right? And so this is to mitigate the risk. It's not excess inventory, right? Excess inventory might be above and beyond what we would call safety or buffer stock. This is really policy driven. This is intentional that we want to hold X amount of inventory of these items in these locations to mitigate the risks, both from the supply side and the demand side. And then if you do this right, you actually tend to have less excess inventory because what we find is with a lack of a good understanding and a clean calculation of safety stock, we tend to overbuy. Right? The way we solve the problem of not being certain is we buy more than we need to, and so now we end up with excess inventory tying up capital. So if you can do a good job of safety stock calculation and setting and monitoring and adjusting over time, because all of this, of course, is somewhat dynamic. It's not static at all. Then you're going to have the ability, a better ability to manage and reduce that excess inventory because you've got proper safety stock calculations. Then as we continue to move up the curve here, we get into areas of demand planning in more detail, more sophisticated level of that, maybe some modeling and strategic planning around those items. So as we learn to focus on those critical items, we are able to move along the curve and become more sophisticated, right? We calculate what our inventory should be, not just what it is, but with some proper modeling and understanding of our demand environments, then what should we have in inventory? And then compare that to what we have. And how do we know what we should have, right? Do we have confidence in that number? And certainly identifying which forecasts then are not performing. So a higher level of accountability once we've started to put those forecast environments in place. Now, how are we measuring their performance, right? What metrics do we have to identify if I've got forecasts that are are either under performing or overperforming, right? Am I selling more than expected or less than expected? And so if I can get ahead of the curve and get some understanding there, that helps me adapt and be dynamic and nimble, especially in a very volatile environment that we find ourselves in today. And then again, as we continue to move up the ladder, or towards this upper right end of the curve, we certainly see that by focusing and identifying and actioning our true excess inventory, because now we understand the nature of that, we understand what's truly in excess. Now we can take some actions on that, and that really needs to become a discipline in the organization. Right? It's a lot like brushing your teeth. You really kind of need to do it every day, because it doesn't take long in a dynamic environment for that to get out of tune and out of whack and cost you a lot of money. So it requires putting some discipline in there, and then that leads us to better supply management. And this is an area that I think really lends itself back to the people conversation. If you think about quality of life for the folks that are engaged in this aspect of the business, that are the buyers and planners and dealing with all the transportation challenges and vendor issues and so forth, this is a much better place for those folks to be spending their time. It's more fulfilling, it's more interesting, it's more fun, it's more challenging, much better than wrestling with Excel spreadsheets and circular errors and formulas and expediting orders and putting out fires and getting yelled at by all constituents within the organization because of the challenges, right? If your demand planners, inventory buyers are spending all their time putting out fires and wrestling with numbers, that's a symptom that you're not at the level of maturity that you need to be in your organization. If you've got those folks really working closely with their vendors, building those relationships, maybe identifying alternative vendors, negotiating transportation rates and looking at alternative transportation modes, and maybe working with different ports and understanding tariffs and so forth that are going on, that's a much higher level function for those folks, and is an indication that you're operating at a fairly mature level, which is great. And those folks on that team really love that environment, right? So, and if they're communicating with their suppliers at that level, you're actually helping them perform, because now you're giving a heads up to the supplier. Hey, look, this is what my demand picture looks like. This is what I'm going to need from you over the coming months, going out maybe 6 to 12 months, right? And give your suppliers that heads up. That helps them perform on your behalf. So it's a win-win for everybody as we go. And then the last section in green that I'll talk about is just that concept of digital dashboard. Again, I kind of alluded to it with a BI tool that allows you to do this. Again, third-party applications do this. They just give you kind of an alert and a heads up so that when things do go out of whack, that you know about it quickly. They show up on dashboards. You get alerts, and now you can take action against those very quickly. And again, be nimble in how you respond to those challenges. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a feel for kind of what this curve looks like. And there's no hard and fast rule. There may be one, or in your organization, your particular situation, one or two of these may change order, if you will. But the point is, understand where you are, what you're doing today, how well it's working, where you need to get to, where you'd like to get to, and what does it take to get along that journey to proceed along this curve. And then what's the effective level of investment in terms of effort and cost and time that it makes sense for you to try to move forward in this curve. And everybody might be in a slightly different place as a starting point, have slightly different criteria for what makes sense and what they need to do, be thinking about where they are from a competitive standpoint and what they need to do that way. But just remember, it's a journey, right? And take steps forward, evaluate, take a look at the roadmap, know where you're headed, and enjoy the journey as much as you can. So with that, a quick segue and a little bit deeper dive into the forecasting side. And this is almost sort of a maturity curve within the curve, if you will, because this is so critical. And it's one of the areas that most ERPs really don't do a very good job of, right? We know that our ERP systems do a great job of capturing transactions and histories and organizing that data and allowing us to report on it. We can build our own custom fields to track whatever data is important to us and our inventory environment And all that's great. And you've got great tools to do that. Where they tend to not focus and do a great job is on the forecasting side. So I think it bears us to spend a few minutes here just thinking about that as we move through the conversation here. And so again, a very beginning, early, sort of immature stage of the forecasting model or process within your organization would be represented there in the left, right? Very manual, very disconnected with others in the organization, not really getting feedback from the finance side as to what's expected, not getting feedback from the sales and marketing side as to, what the demand looks like for certain items, what customers are coming down the pike, what promotions may be planned. So a very immature, manual, disconnected process. And as a result, kind of a lack of accountability, right? If we don't expect it to be accurate, then when it's not accurate, we don't hold anybody accountable. And so this is a very mature, very problematic stage for a forecasting mindset in the organization. The next stage we would call an evolving environment or a stage where you're starting to see some structure, some feedback with colleagues on various teams within the organization. Someone's been assigned a core responsibility and now is being somewhat held accountable for managing the forecast, producing the forecast, hopefully monitoring it a little bit, and maybe using some better tools, less manual, using some spreadsheets or some sophisticated formulas in that spreadsheet to help predict, maybe some seasonality, maybe some trending, maybe something a little bit better than just some averaging. So that would be kind of an evolving step. And it's possible that many of you listening to this are kind of in that stage. If so, we would encourage you to try to get to the next level, which would be, we would call an improving stage of that forecasting model, where you're really getting consensus. You're not just communicating with others and getting feedback, but you're coming to an agreement, right? You're sitting down together, looking at the numbers, evaluating what's coming down the pike and saying, yeah, here's what we think is going to happen. Is everybody on the same page? And of course, your operations people, this is where they want you to get to, because operations folks don't want to be embroiled in the controversy. They don't want to be part of the argument. They just want to be told, here's what I expect, execute to this plan, right? Here's the plan, go execute. That's what operations folks want to do, whether it's on the distribution side or in a manufacturing environment. This helps them. So now you've got some formal measurement in place. You've got more sophisticated tools, so some algorithms that are doing the math for you in terms of projecting future demand and doing a better job of exception management, identifying where those forecasts are not performing as expected so that you can make adjustments on the fly, right? Because forecast is the best guess. It's never going to be 100% accurate. Things change, again, a very dynamic environment. But this would really be a great place for most of you to be. And then it positions you to take that next step into a best practices model, where you've got not only consensus, but full collaboration. People are helping each other. We're all on the same team. There's a recognition of how important this is. One of the things I'm hearing from thought leaders in supply chain these days as a result of COVID, that now in the middle market business, small, medium-sized companies, the buyers and planners, the supply chain management role has really taken a seat at the table at a higher level, right? They're now involved in strategic discussions, and there's full collaboration and integration of all those different constituencies, and that's huge. And then not only are we using algorithms, but we're using a methodology to fit the best algorithm against past performance and testing that and constantly testing it and revising it to make sure we've got a best fit, that we've got the right algorithms predicting demand for those correct items in different locations and so forth. And then a cycle of continuous improvement there as well. So a quick segue into a really key part of that maturity curve is to focus on the forecasting component itself. And then I think as we wrap it up, I would just talk about a couple of things here relative to change. We know change management is a difficult thing, and it may not be your expertise. It's certainly not mine. It's kind of a discipline in its own right. But we can do some things, right? There are some suggestions that I could make here to help you manage that change. And so the first question again is, where should you be? as we look at ourselves and assess ourselves honestly and objectively, where are we today? Where should we be? And importantly, where are your competitors, right? In the world that we live in today, very competitive. Middle market companies especially are now competing against the big boxes of the world, right? The Targets and Home Depots and Lowe's and Bed Bath and Beyond and whatever other big box retailer you can think of. And then, of course, there's the e-commerce players, Amazon being the big gorilla, but there's plenty of others as well that you compete against. Those folks have plenty of resources, the people, the money, the technology, the investment to really be challenging competitors. So where are you? And then you have, of course, your own local middle market competitors, depending on your environment, your marketplace. So if they're getting ahead of you in this process, if they're thinking about this stuff and taking action and you're not, that's going to show up very quickly. And so you really need to be thinking about that from that angle or that perspective. And then again, back to the concept of just one step at a time. Change is hard. It can be overwhelming. If you look at that whole roadmap, it could be maybe defeating a little bit that, man, I don't have what it takes to get there. One step at a time, right? Bite the elephant one bite at a time. Assess where you're at. Take the next step. Take a breath. Take the next step. And again, going back to that, establishing the need and the benefit. Be transparent about that. Be collaborative about that. Get the top-down buy-in from the executive level, but also the bottom-up buy-in that, yeah, this is something I can do. I have the right tools. I have the training, the technology, et cetera, to execute on the plan. But really have everybody be motivated by what this is going to mean to the organization, right? The benefit of doing this correctly and sticking with it, being disciplined with it over the period of weeks and months and even years. If you continue to work through this, you're going to see the benefit, and it's going to be huge. It's going to make a big difference for you in terms of being able to grow the company, expand the quality of life for your employees, hire more people, obviously benefits to the shareholders and boards of directors and so forth. So lay out that roadmap, be clear about where you're headed and how we got to get there. Understand that new tools and processes take some time. You have to be able to absorb some things, right? If I got a new procedure, make sure that everybody's aware of it. It's been communicated. We're monitoring it. We're testing it. Is it working? Is it working the way we expected it to? Make adjustments and then settle in, right? So now that process is cemented. It's in place. And same with any new tools or new technologies. Make sure that we allow it to have the time it needs to settle in and really test it and see the results correctly. And that really feeds a process of continuous improvement. Years ago, I was fortunate enough to take some courses in that concept of thinking about my own organization and what that process of continuous improvement would look like, putting teams together, committees together to evaluate and assess, present results, make recommendations to the broader team as to, hey, here's a way we could improve the business in this area or that. And so I really encourage you to leverage that concept of continuous improvement and again, continuing to take a step and be nimble and make adjustments along the way. And then I guess the final thing I would actually throw out here as we wrap this up, and remember to go ahead and put your questions in the chat environment as we wrap up and go through this, and we'll be live afterwards to answer questions and go through those as well. Be thinking about how you can leverage your ERP business partner. Right? They're a perfect resource that's a kind of a third party, a separate set of eyes that's independent. They're not in the weeds with you. They can see it from a distance, but they also understand your business very well. They probably have relationships at all levels of your organization, from the executive level on down to the staff level and warehouse level and so forth. So I would encourage you to leverage your business partner to have to bring their perspective to this, right? To think about how they could help you effect the changes, help you identify what those next steps would be and what it will take to get to the next step, leverage their business expertise and their understanding and knowledge of your business, as well, of course, as their understanding of the technology that you've deployed from the either ERP or from any third-party applications that you may have in place. So those would be some of my recommendations and suggestions in terms of managing the change process. And I certainly wish you nothing but the best of luck. So with that, thank you again so much for your time. Thank you again to the community for voting for this session to be presented. Hopefully you found it valuable. I'm certainly open to individual conversations with you. You see my contact information there, russ@netstock.co. Feel free to reach out. I look forward to fielding your questions, to looking at what you've put into the chat environment for me, and having the opportunity to meet with you in person at some point as we get back to hopefully some live events over the course of the next months and year. And hopefully this had some value for you. Thank you again. Really appreciate it. And we'll conclude for now. Take care. All right. Thanks, everybody. Yeah. Hi, Kim. How you doing?
Hi, Russ. I wanted to take some time to thank everyone for tuning in today, of course.
Yep, absolutely.
The inventory maturity curve can be a lot to take in. So as Russ mentioned, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to let them fly in the chat. But, I'm happy to get the ball rolling here for us, Russ.
Yeah, and I saw a couple of comments that came in that I think may be worthy of some comment as well. I mean, one of the comments was about kind of the timeliness of this presentation, and clearly we can't watch any newscast, pick up a paper, or go online anywhere and not hear the topic of supply chain these days, right? It's affecting us all as consumers. It's certainly affecting all of our businesses. And it's never been more top of mind for most organizations than it has been for the last 18 months. And it's not going to change anytime soon. We've got still a lot of disruption out there, a lot of things that need to kind of level out. We've still got obviously a rampant pandemic, and especially in other parts of the world where we may be sourcing some of our products. Yeah, it could not be more timely. And I think if you're a business partner viewing this and thinking about this, it's such a great opportunity to have this conversation with your customers, right? And just have that, ask that open-ended question: how are you guys managing this? What are you dealing with? How are you trying to solve it? Do you have what you need to be able to get the visibility and get ahead of the curve and so forth? So yeah, it could not be any more timely. And then one of the other comments was just about focused really on the transportation issue on the supply side. I'm out on the West Coast, and the commenter was also out on West Coast. If you look out in Long Beach Harbor, the LA Harbor area, there's literally 60, 70 huge freighters sitting out there for weeks and months at a time, loaded with product that can't get into dock and unload. So you may have placed your order on time, and it's sitting out there in sight, but not anywhere close to your warehouse, and it couldn't be more frustrating. So it's a challenge we're going to have to live with for a while.
Definitely. Well, Russ, I know one question we often get when it comes to discussing the maturity curve and inventory planning is, where in your experience have you seen most middle market firms sitting in that curve?
Yeah, good question. I think, as we deal with hundreds and thousands of folks during the course of a year, I would say most middle market folks are kind of in the middle range, right? I think in the presentation, we talked about the forecasting curve specifically. They're really in that evolving to improving area. Most are using Excel spreadsheets and struggling with that as their forecasting tool. And so that's probably where most are at, and looking to figure out, can I make that better? Because there's a lot of risks involved in using that spreadsheet. And in fact, we at NetStock, we've done a series of blog posts on it. We do some webinar content that specifically talks over the course of 30, 45 minutes, what all the different risk factors are and challenges and costs, hidden costs of using a spreadsheet to do that forecasting, what those are and what the impact is on the organization. And you still have a problem if you're still dealing with the big challenges of inventory, which is running out of some stuff and having too much of other stuff. If that's still the picture that describes your organization, then whatever tool you're using isn't working. And in most cases today, that's a spreadsheet. And I think, in the broader maturity curve, most middle market firms are primarily leveraging their ERP application and the data within to try to run some reports, maybe some custom reports, maybe accessing some BI tools. There's been some great sessions here this week at DynamicsCon, right, about how to use Power BI to leverage some of that great data that exists in the ERP, but it's not necessarily easily accessed and organized the way you want it for actionable information. So I think that's where we find most folks. And if they have the opportunity to move to a more purpose-built third-party application, that oftentimes is a potential growth area and an area of improvement for them. But I think that's what we see most of the time.
Definitely. I know in terms of timeliness of this topic, another great question is just how have you seen COVID impact how the middle market firms are thinking about this problem?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, and I was fortunate when COVID first hit and supply chains really initially shut down completely. I had the opportunity to do a bunch of podcasts, really, video Zoom meetings with a bunch of thought leaders and consultants and some practitioners out in the business world, and kind of pick their brains a little bit about it. And I think one of the themes, two key themes I think that came out of that. One is the ever growing importance of constant communication, right? Communicating up and down the supply chain, and maybe even taking that to another layer where I'm not just talking to my suppliers, but maybe my suppliers' suppliers a little bit further down the chain, and not just to my customers, but maybe my customers' customers, to get a sense of any trending or impacts or things that are going on, because you just have to really work hard to get ahead of the curve, to be anticipating what's going on and being able to make adjustments. So I think that was one major theme, was that we've all learned how important that is. And hopefully that's a best practice that carries on after things even settle down, that we continue to maintain those relationships and those communication channels with our vendors and with our customers, so that we always are in tune with what's happening. And then the second thing is just the increasing level of appreciation, I guess, by the executive level, by the owners and management teams, of how critical this function is in the organization. A lot of firms have spent a lot of time and effort putting in great ERP applications, right? Like the Dynamics apps that have wonderful charts of accounts and general ledger and reporting functionality. We're adding budgeting tools and financial forecasting tools for those folks. We do a lot with the CRM side. And the sales side of the organization, right? Giving them all kinds of tools, and obviously LinkedIn integration and Teams and all the stuff that we can do now in the Microsoft stack that helps our sales teams. And that's all good. That's important. But to some degree, what's been overlooked is in the middle of all that is the supply chain function that manages the most critical asset in the organization, right? Your inventory. It's what drives your profit. It's why you're in business, is to buy and sell and move inventory and make margin on every transaction. And we haven't provided the right tools and the right processes and training and to some degree level of respect for that function. So I think one of the other messages that came out clear is that concept of the seat at the table, right? That management and sales and finance understand now how critical it is that this function gets heard, gets feedback, and is part of the conversation, so that firms can really be more cohesive and collaborative in their planning efforts. And I think that's a huge positive trend. We've seen that in big enterprises for years, and I think that's now what's really showing up in the middle market.
Great. So I know we have a couple minutes left, Russ. Any parting words you want to leave with our listeners here?
Well, I think if there's any wisdom, just get started, right? Do that assessment, be honest with yourself. Where do you stand? And just get started. Figure out what's that next step, and follow that loop of continuous improvement. Figure it out. And if you get something right, you make some improvements, celebrate it, share that victory, have some fun with that. And then, okay, guys, we're back at it. Here's the next thing, right? So I think just get started. Get some positive results, celebrate that motivates the next step. Because again, I use the word often in the presentation, it's a journey, right? So every journey starts with that first step, I think is the colloquial term out there, the phrase, and it couldn't be more accurate in this case, right? Take the first step, get some results, and keep moving forward. And a year or two down the road, you look back and you realize you've really covered a lot of ground and made a huge difference in the business.
Crawl, walk, run. Definitely.
There you go. There you go. So thanks again, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
We'll hopefully talk to you individually. I look forward to that opportunity. Take care.